Hey David, how are you doing? I want to say hello to everyone who joined us here today. Okay, so I always start out with a small introduction, small spiel. I just want to say this session, is special for a few reasons. David and I, we go back a long, long way. Long. Okay, so I just have to say it's at least 30 years, right? Correct. About there, 30 years that
Yeah.
we haven't actually seen each other. So we kind of like know each other from school, church, choir, and so on and so forth. So it's a real treat to to see him in person again, literally, after these decades lah. Okay, so because we know each other quite well. I am going to attempt to ask him some questions that I would never dare to ask anyone else. Okay, so whatever you're going to see or you witness is very organic. Feel free to ask any questions that you want to in the Q&A box, and we will try our very best to answer as many as we can, given the time that's allotted to us. I also want to sort of say thanks to David in advance because he's the only guest. Because I talked to him about this idea of this chat, and it's very much catered to the bulk of the people that we work with a lot of mid-careerists and mid-career pivoters, and so on and so forth. And I share with him sort of like a lot of them, they are thinking about, okay, maybe RMs who no longer want to be RMs, and they think, oh, maybe I'll move to compliance. But all I know is, a couple of phrases, AML, KYC, and so on and so forth. So I guess this dialogue is very much catered to that mid-careerist. So the people who are already in compliance, then, bear with us for some of the stuff that you already know. But for people who are new to this and who are exploring potentially this pathway, I hope the information that we share will be useful to you. And David has taken some of his precious time to actually to draft a couple of slides, which I will share in a little while. But overall, I want to say, hey, David, thanks so much, and thanks for being here today.
Oh, and thank you for inviting me as well. Yeah, really happy to be here.
Okay, cool. So the first question I always ask on my launching my first salvo, right, is this. Okay, I always like to ask about my guests' background and how you ended up in in what you do. Okay, so I'm thinking to myself that nobody wakes up one day and says, you know what, I aspire to be a compliance professional one day. Whoo. So for you, how did you get into this business? How from uni or whatever it is, how did you finally land up into compliance and doing this for so long already?
Yeah, sure. And I think you're right to say, I mean, nobody, joining the banking industry says my first desired role is compliance. Everybody wants to be the front office, right? The
Yeah.
investment banker, the sexy one, having the wine and the drinks and, on the yacht parties that you see in Wolf of Wall Street. Definitely not the guy in the back room, stacked
Yeah,
with tons of paper and, trying to check off every box.
that is the imagery.
So
Yes, correct, that's the imagery. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it didn't start off this way. What happened was I graduated and then I came across a net in the government in newspapers looking for a policy analyst, with MTI, Ministry of Trade and Industry. So I just went for that because I had an economics degree and kind of upbringing. So to my surprise, before I even had an interview with the government, they asked me to write a kind of an essay. So I was like, isn't that what I do in uni, what I do in school, right? Writing essays. I think it's something that I'm probably good at. So I went, did it in 45 minutes, submitted the paper, and next thing I knew, I was called for the interview. So that kind of set the stage, that it's something that I like to do. I like writing, and I'm English educated background. I think that kind of helps because a lot of reading of books when young, general knowledge, all these all comes into play, whether I knew it or not when I was young. But later on, as you see, as you grow along the career, and having a background in economics, kind of also kind of helps. So with that, I ventured into the very very first brush with policy, um, as a policymaker of MTI. I covered off the energy, utility, and water markets. So we're talking about strategic stuff, right? Securing Singapore's water supply, negotiations with Indonesia, whether or not can we bring the water in if Malaysia turn off the taps, stuff like that. And that kind of interests me because I was looking at something really big, something macro for the country, something really meaningful. And that's how I started. Thereafter, I think after about 2 years, I wanted something more than that. So I thought, hey, I'm on the government side of the fence. Why don't I move to the, the private sector side of things? And so I, explored that career, with the private sector, doing something similar. And I found something with Singapore Telecoms. So also regulatory and policy. So that's how, that common theme carried on. And I went into it. Same thing. I was asked to write a paper before the interview.
Okay.
So I did it. They obviously liked my writing. I got hired.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And started to deal with IDA, with the regulators and all that. So,
Okay.
the other side of the fence. Yeah. Then of course, then I realized, hey, in the telco market, there's only really three big players, right? Singtel, StarHub, or M1, and where else can you go? So I thought, hey, let me give it a shot in the banking world. But I think like most people here today, most of them may think, I'm not even in the banking sector. How do I even get hired? Everyone talks about, minimum 2 years experience, but I don't
Yeah.
even have that experience, right? So
Yeah.
it has to start somewhere. It has to start with something that could link you into the banking sector. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, that was policy, regulations, and analysis.
Okay.
So a chance on that SGX role. There was a role available for a junior policy officer. And I wrote in again. I had to write an essay. Yeah. So this one was really interesting. I wrote it over the weekend. It was like just 2 pages back to back
Yeah.
with bibliography, footnotes, blah blah blah. It's
Yeah.
really like a thesis. And then next thing, I submitted on Monday morning. By lunchtime, they said I want to see this guy for an interview. So then I went for it, and that was how I got into SGX. So I started with policy writing, competitions law compliance for the exchange, because at that time the Competitions Act was in the draft stage, and I think exchange as one of the monopoly in the Singapore market,
Mm.
they were really concerned if they were in compliance with the upcoming rules. So from the inside, I went on an internal transfer. After I think about a couple of months, I
Mm.
rotated to the what we call your broker supervision or member supervision department.
Right.
So that's like a MES regulatory role. So you became the regulator,
Okay.
and then you had a whole portfolio of broker dealers assigned to you. I had a couple of major ones like Goldman Sachs, ABN AMRO Futures, Nomura,
Mm.
and the likes.
Mm.
So I was like the regulatory officer for these companies, and then I start to see how we have meetings with them. What are we regulating them on? The stability, the operations, the internal controls, and stuff like that. And then of course, your backside got itchy. So hey, I said SGS is not too bad, but I want to be with the big boys. I really want to cross over
Yeah. Yeah.
from
Yeah.
regulator to regulated. And so I went in there, and that's how I started my career. So again, remember, there's a common link: policy, regulations, analysis,
Yeah.
and that's how I got in.
I think that's great because we
Yeah,
work with people, and then a lot of times when they want to move from A to whatever D or C, right? That jump
yeah,
always seems so wide. But I think we always tell people you look for that common theme. So from what you're saying, right, it seems as though you started with A, and then slowly the next job gave you A plus B, and then
yeah.
after that, some that all of a sudden that jump didn't feel so wide anymore, right? And then from
Yeah,
starting from policy all the way to slowly being exposed to compliance aspects to moving to full-fledged compliance. So I think that's very important and very useful kind of a reinforcing thing that you just said, which we also
yeah,
say to our people that we work with in terms of finding that, like what you mentioned, the common theme
yeah.
and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, someone just wrote into the chat like I think you probably can be an essay writer when when you're retired and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
Okay, so that's great. You've been in compliance for such a long time already, so you're quite
yeah,
fluent. And so here's the part where I'm gonna flash a couple of slides. So guys, people in the audience, as I said, I kind of mooted the idea to David to give an overview of this compliance landscape. Probably not super exhaustive, and we don't have the time to go into in any depth. But I do appreciate the two slides that he sort of like he created for this session. So I'm just going to flash it right now, and then the overall idea or question is basically to demystify or give a roadmap to the people who are interested in this space but don't really know enough beyond, as I said, right, the couple of your keywords, right? Yeah. So I'm just going to flash it right now, and then maybe you can just walk us through what it's all about. Yeah,
Sure.
and then just
Yeah.
give people an overview so that they understand. And if there are people who are interested in filing applications for compliance rules, maybe this thing might help them further granularize their application and understanding what the difference is. So I hand it over to you, and just let me know when you
Sure.
want to change the slide. Okay.
Sure thing.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. So as you can see on screen, right, there are three pillars. I would call it in the left, middle, and right. And each of them, you have different varying, roles and what I call expertise or
Specialties.
specialism.
Yep.
Yeah, specialities in it. Um, there are three tracks of compliance. The
Mm.
first two are more intertwined, but the third track tends to be standalone in a sense, and it varies again for different size of financial institutions. For the
Right.
large ones, you're going to see more specialized areas. So, for instance, you look on the right, there could be a dedicated sanctions team, say within DBS or OCBC,
Right.
and anti-bribery and corruption team as well. In 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 a bank. But if
In
you
it.
see a
Okay.
smaller shop, then you see that it's probably everything is going to be
All
done by the
lumped
same
into one.
compliance
Okay.
officer.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
So what we call the yeah, jack of all trades and hopefully master of all as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it really depends which size bank or which size FI you decide to join or
Mm-hmm.
interested in joining.
Right.
Now, what I would like to say is for people who are contemplating careers in compliance, the one on the right, it tends to be very financial crime focused.
Mm.
So it's also very important because where you decide you want to go could potentially brand you for much of your career. So if you started out, say, in KYC, then that's linked to AML. So I mentioned earlier, right, how my experience is always about linkages. So if you start off on financial crime,
Yep.
chances are you're going to become a AML or financial crime specialist for the large part of your career. And barring any changes, like unless you decide to double head or you join a small firm where you're forced to do everything,
Mm.
then you're going to be uh, what I call a financial crime compliance person.
Okay.
Now, whereas on the left is what I call regulatory compliance,
Yep.
and I've kind of bulleted down the various sub industries within banking finance
Mm.
where businesses require this kind of compliance advisory.
Mm.
So we start off with the biggest ones, and the ones that come from are the first three bullets. I've actually done global markets, investment banking, and corporate banking compliance.
Mm.
So collectively, they're also known as wholesale banking to
Yep.
some
That's
extent.
it. Yep.
Yep. And these are the sell side, your global RMs, your local SME banking, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next few are really on the buy side. So you got your wealth management and your fund asset management.
Right.
So these are the ones that do funds, and then you got your retail. Obviously, retail is like loans and housing loans and
Yeah.
personal loans, credit cards. And
Yep.
then FA is all about financial advisory,
Mm.
um, insurance, and all that. And of course the latest rich now is fintech and
Yes.
regtech and digital banking and payments. So that kind of makes up that area. That
Mm-hmm.
one is where you really need to have quite a bit of advisory knowledge because you're actually interfacing with the business, and they will usually ask you about things like, hey, if I'm going to start a new business in this country, what are the things I can or cannot do?
Mm.
Can you tell me?
Right.
So you have to go and research and find out like, oh, what's the license requirement? What's the license application process?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any controls that the regulator in that country will expect from
Mm-hmm.
a new business? And what's the internal control policies that you have and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Yep.
All right. So that's regulatory. Regulatory tend to be more country specific in that sense,
Okay.
right? And then moving to the center, which is my current role in central.
Mm.
Pretty much most of the stuff in there, I'm currently myself and my team are covering.
Mm.
So these are what we call services that transcend the regulatory compliance as well. So you have control room. Control room is obviously linked more to the first three bullets on the left. They talk about like wall crossing. When you go for an M&A deal,
Mm.
or an IPO, or you're going to issue a bond
Mm.
or a structured note, then you do need to call some of these deals in the control room to
Right.
contain the what I call the material non-public information or inside information, because failure to do so obviously means that some people can capitalize on that advantage,
Correct. Yep.
that advanced information, and then do insider trading, which obviously would be a criminal act,
Yep.
right? And licensing is where you apply for the RMs or the reps who decide to do training.
Mm.
Yeah. And then conflicts. You have personal as well as bank conflicts. So it goes down the list. Trade surveillance talks about checking on your traders who are trading, making sure they're not manipulating the markets. Monitoring and testing is where you look out into all the other areas, not just within compliance, but even within other functions like
Okay.
HR or finance or the front office, and check on their procedures, making sure they follow those procedures to a T.
Yeah.
And then you have, as you go down the list in the middle, you see that it becomes more corporate. So you have things like regulatory change management. So covering the region, we actually have to do a lot of management reporting, metrics, uh, any reg change that happens, say in Singapore or Hong Kong, we actually need to get that information, get the teams in those countries to kind of run the analysis. How does that impact the business? Are there any gaps? How do you go close those gaps? Then report that back up to head office, and they will also want to track, what's the status to gap closure to status to green. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, of course, further down, you have the support function stuff, which is, your technology compliance, outsourcing, vendor procurement. You're going to think about some of these that link back to, when you deal with vendors, will they give you gifts? Is it going to be a bribery or corruption kind of activity going on? Are you taking out your vendors? Are your vendors taking you out to nice, fanciful hotels and, expensive meals,
Yeah.
lobster and all that? So then
Yeah.
you have to declare all this. Yeah, I mean, it
Yeah.
has to be above board. So that's where the compliance kind of tend to link back to that. And then on the
Understand.
right also, like KYC. So as you know, that's a very, very key area of focus for the government in the context of Singapore, the MAS. I think over the last 5 years, you've heard of 1MDB, many banks being fined,
Yeah.
right? Many
Yeah. Yeah.
compliance heads losing their jobs because of all these reputational failings. So KYC is very important because that's where you actually establish where your client's business model,
Yeah.
where the money come from, where the money going to, where the source of funds are,
Yeah.
who are the directors, are they a shell company in the Cayman Islands or BVIs, are they incorporated somewhere where the long arm of the law cannot catch them?
Right.
So it's very important for all that. Yeah, and that kind of then does link back to regulatory compliance in that sense.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic. Hey, I want to ask you a question. Now, this is something
sure.
that I just thought about. When I was a headhunter, right? I told you I was headhunter for a decade. One of the things that I noticed, right? So on the right-hand side, FCC, like financial crime compliance, right? I
Yep.
see a lot of like people who are ex-CID officers, right? I think that makes a lot
Mm.
of sense, right? You probably see some of those
Yes.
police officers, right?
Yeah.
And I know that profile definitely can work for FCC, but for the other two pillars, right? I mean, are
Yeah.
there any typical archetypes of people or backgrounds that would fit quite nicely in one of those two pillars at all, or
Right.
it
Right.
depends.
Yes. I would say some character preference or nature will
Yeah.
tend to be suited in certain pillars. So the ones on the left, right, you are always front facing.
Mm.
So you must be thick skinned, enough to be scolded or shouted at without losing your cool.
Yeah.
Right. So when you see the Wolf of Wall Street, you see those traders who have got huge alpha egos and they
Yeah.
think like they're God, right? And
Yeah.
then they basically they don't have time for nonsense. So they want the answer like with a snap of a finger. Now,
Yeah.
now.
Mm.
Yeah, tell me now. I have no time. Please tell me now.
Yeah.
Those kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you've got to deal with the massive egos there. So now if you think that you cannot handle this kind of front office people,
Yeah.
then you can consider
The
the
first
other
pillar
two
is gone.
pillars.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The other two pillars are, I would say the time sensitivity is not so crucial.
Mm.
It's more of a, I would call it operational and a bit more back end. So
Mm.
you can actually be cooped up in your room, in the compliance room all day long. Nobody knows
Mm.
you're alive, dead or alive, and you still do your job. And then when something happens, yeah, you just issue a breach reminder, right? And then or a breach warning to the
Yeah.
person in the front. Then they're like, hey, where did that come from? I didn't know
He's
you were still in the
alive. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He's
yeah.
alive. Okay. Yeah.
So there is safety in numbers in the central column and on the right side. Now on the
Mm.
right side, unless you're the KYC side, then of course, yeah, you deal with RMs primarily. So
Mm.
you will get some hit because sometimes you will ask for documents that the RMs and the client think is stupid, but it's wanted and required by MES.
Right.
So they'll say, I need your passport. I say, why? Why do I need my passport? Can't you see my face on the website? You know?
You got kidding. Okay. That's so funny. Okay.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
you need to identify and verify your client, or the what we call the ultimate beneficial owner, or the
Yeah.
directors of the firm. So you need to know them to that level, and you get difficulties, especially with state-owned entities like in China, right? Half of the entities are usually state-owned because of the nature of the Communist Party.
Yeah.
And then they'll say, "Oh, I'm part of the government. Why do you need to send me? Why do I need to send you my passport?"
Right.
And then you have to figure out, negotiate a way to get the document, because ultimately you have to balance both sides, right? The client as well as the regulatory expectations from the
Yeah,
MES. Yeah.
exactly. Sometimes quite difficult.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, so moving on to the next slide, right? Which I'm trying my best to. Aha. Okay, come walk us through the framework.
sure. So this is typical, what I call a typical compliance life cycle. So as you can see, I kind of borrowed the model from my current bank, because there have been many models in the past, more or less similar.
Mm,
But if you look, and we start with the light blue governance, so that's where it starts off.
mm,
You have a policy.
mm.
The bank will set a policy, global, regional,
Right.
local, and from there, you kind of state out your mission statement for compliance. What do you do? What
Mm,
does the bank do? Right. So that's very important, because when a regulator comes and inspect you, they will ask for all these kind of documents. What's your
mm.
framework? What's your internal control? What are your policy and procedures?
Yep.
Then that comes to the next step, right? Regulatory relationship. So
Mm,
how do you manage the MES, your desk review officer? How do you manage the SGX?
mm.
How do you manage any other regulators that you may be, your bank may be part of, like HKMA, Australia,
Right.
APRA, for instance. Yeah, and that's important, because that itself is a skill. You don't want to over give information to the regulator. Then you basically just give them more chance to shoot you with inspection bullets. But neither do you want to under declare, and then when they find out more, then you'll be in deep trouble. So there is a balance in that space. And in fact, sometimes there is a role called reg relations. That's something that's new and up and coming.
Mm,
In some of the larger banks, we
mm.
see in APAC, like recently Wells Fargo, DBS, they have it. Our bank itself, they starting this new function as well.
Right.
So it's almost like ambassadorial role in that sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
then moving on to next one. So it's regulatory obligations. So once you got your governance in place, your high level framework in place,
Mm,
you need to comply. Obviously, you need to comply with something. So the regs, the legislation, the notices from MES, the guidelines. These are where your primary go-to points.
mm,
And then if there's an obligation, there needs to be a solution or a control to
mm,
demonstrate compliance. So that's where you build in your say your gift and entertainment policy. What are your approval limits and thresholds,
mm,
and that will match the regulatory obligations, right? And then from there, um, it's a nice job, but the problem is it's not been tested. So that's where the risk assessment comes in, and it will test the program, right, to see whether it is robust enough, whether there are gaps or material gaps. Maybe the controls are too manual. You want something that's more automated, so that there's a less risk of human error or transcription error. So the risk assessment comes to play, and we do this. I think it's catching on with most banks. Right after the '08 financial crisis, a lot of banks had to overhaul a lot of things. So risk assessment was one of those areas where you really, tore apart the compliance and regulatory program, and really look at what we call the first, second, and third line of defense to see, are all P's and P's in place, are all processes working fine. So
mm,
the risk assessment is important. And with risk assessment, it will identify for you where are your medium risk areas, your high risk areas, and your low risk areas. And then that's where the next two pillars come in: monitoring and testing. Monitoring will be a regular affair, periodic, picking samples. Testing will be more thematic. So testing will be if you see something that's happening more and more often, despite more and more training, something is not catching on with the employees. So you need to then test and find out what's going on in that space. So testing is targeted, monitoring is more broad stroke in that sense. And then obviously with monitoring and testing, you will pick up issues, incidents, breaches, right? Metrics as well. Then you have to investigate, you have to deep dive sometimes. I have a team that does a bit of forensic, a bit of investigations. We interview the people who breached the policy, and that itself is another story, and can be quite interesting what you find out from the investigations. And then write up the incident report, recommend the appropriate course of compliance action, whether it's a reminder, a warning, bonus cut, or termination. And that all goes into reporting analytics, and then the whole cycle completes.
Okay, that's so cool. So for the people who are smart enough, who are here and who have taken the screenshots, good for you. I hope that's permitted, David. Sorry, because some people are definitely going to do it. Okay, so back to, I guess, our session in general. So there's a lot of like kind of like questions that I would like to ask, lah. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
you know, that just come to my mind. And again, to everyone who's here, I always tell people, you know, that I can ask David what I dare not ask other people, right? So, you know, when it comes to compliance, I've been in a bank before, right? And maybe, you know, people see compliance as, you know, like policemen or very leceh lah. Stay away from these people. David walks down the hallway, just walk the other way lah. You know what I mean? You know, and yeah, and you know, like you know, the job is very, very, very administratively heavy, mundane, maybe dry. Sorry, yeah. Are you able to maybe debunk some of these beliefs or myths, you know, like, you know, and of course for myself, right? Because of this prevailing thought that, oh my God, compliance are here and they're the policemen, right? How do you win them over? How do you work hand in hand with your stakeholders, right, to win them over? So basically all these questions, I'm giving you a platform, an opportunity to
Yeah.
market your profession as a very,
Sure.
very interesting one. Okay, go for it.
Yeah. Sure. I don't disagree with you. Sometimes when I walk into the pantry, everybody just disappear. No, I'm just kidding. But it takes time, right? It
Yeah.
takes time. It takes effort to build relationships. Just like an RM with the client, we
Mm,
too have to build our
mm,
relationship with our internal clients, stakeholders.
yeah.
So they're talking about the front office people, the back office people,
Yeah.
because compliance is everywhere. We actually have to peer into every function and department because of how everything is intertwined and how we're ultimately, helping the bank and the CEO to be answerable to the regulators. So from that angle, if they know us well enough, and we
Mm,
have to market ourselves well in this, is to tell them, we're not here to stop you doing business. We're here to advise you to navigate the regulations and the restrictions, so that you guys come out alive, right? That I don't have to go to Changi prison and visit you, and yeah, your name don't come out in the newspaper. After that, you can only drive Grab, for instance. Sorry, I'm not debunking or
yeah,
dismissing the,
understand.
the gig economy, but sometimes, and there have been cases. The previous bank where I worked at, a couple of FX traders actually lost their job, couldn't find any other job. They
Of
ended up
course,
having
yeah.
to drive Grab because their reputation was just down the drain forever,
Understand.
right?
Yeah.
So to let them know we are their trusted partners. In the past, we have been known as business prevention officers, but I think what is more appropriate is that we are partners to the
Mm,
business,
mm.
right? To let them know that, look, if you don't tell us early enough, it means that when the thing explodes, we have to help you clean it up. But rather than, reach that stage, why don't you just share with us what you're doing? If you have any concerns, it doesn't mean the moment you tell us we'll breach you and then hang you out to dry, right?
Yeah.
If there's a chance for us to kind of mitigate the damage, we will help you do that.
Okay.
Because we kind of read the rules, we interpret the rules, and then we advise you what to do.
So basically, yeah, you're
So
there. You're there
yeah,
for that protection, actually, right? Yeah.
correct. Yeah,
Yeah. Got it.
yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
so all the more they should be coming to us if they have any concerns, and not be fearful about the repercussions. I mean, we sometimes it is what it is, right? You may have done something, but hey, who hasn't done anything wrong, right?
Yeah, and
So
and yeah, and
yeah,
best to kind of like nip it in the bud before it becomes
yeah,
too serious that you
yeah.
cannot recover from it anymore. I got you.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So I think
Okay.
I'd like to take one example. So like in my previous bank,
Yeah.
I was really really close to the business.
Mm,
Obviously, after a lot of relationship building, sometimes you have to also go out and network with your front office and join them for drinks, nights, and dinners and stuff like that.
mm,
So they got comfortable with me, and often before they run a new initiative or a new project,
mm,
they'll come and ask for my frank opinion, because
mm,
sometimes there are things that can be said in a closed door meeting room,
mm,
and help them to think out and think through the process
mm.
before they decide if they want to formally launch. Because once you formally launch, there's evidential trail, and then everything is on record. And if regulators come in, most banks have record retention policies, so you,
Yeah.
you can't delete. Even if you think you delete on Outlook or Lotus Notes, the IT will be able to bring it back for you and show you. Okay, so everything is kept for minimum 7 years. So yeah,
Mm.
don't think you just delete and it's gone. It's not like that.
It's not like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
At this juncture, I'm just gonna go off a bit, and I've been noticing
sure.
some of the Q&A, and I thought, hey, this would be very good to answer some of the live questions because I one of the questions that were asked, I found it quite interesting and it was also very useful. Okay,
Sure.
so if you notice Q&A, Lee Chang, I don't know, is it Lear? I don't know what,
Yeah.
sorry if I got the name wrong.
Oh,
But this is a very good question. Are there some overlaps within IA and compliance? But I want to ask you a question. I want to throw in ORM inside as well. So if you
yeah.
can, where does one begin and where does one end? IA or ops risk and maybe
Yeah.
compliance. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sure. So in banking, there's this concept of three lines of defense. All right. So ORM sits on the first line.
Mm,
They basically look after, as the word operational risk management,
mm,
suggests,
mm,
anything that's operational or procedural in nature,
mm,
and if it breaks down, they need to investigate the root cause for that.
mm,
So it could be, if someone makes a mistake in sending a massive payment out, or someone decides to send out the money and approve that payment themselves. So you have a risk of maker checker where
mm,
no one's checking on the person who made the amount to be sent out,
mm.
and how does anyone, so that's ORM, that's first line of defense.
Okay.
They sit with the business, and we call them the first line governance control function.
Okay.
So compliance is second line of defense, so
Okay.
we will be the ones that check and advise the first line, which is ORM, and we also advise the business.
Fantastic.
So
Okay.
so that's where it works. And then audit checks on us and checks on first line. So audit is line 3.
Mm.
And yeah, there is some overlap with audit and compliance, because sometimes we test the same things, and then obviously the front office will jump on us and say, like, I thought I already answered this question, right? Say, oh, that was for audit, now it's compliance.
That's
So
damn
we, we
funny.
we try to tag team and coordinate a bit, so that we don't cause too much pain to the business in that sense.
Okay, fantastic. That's
Yeah.
super. That I think in itself, I think that's a gem of an answer because we get a lot
Yeah.
of questions between, as I said, those three items, right? And then sometimes
Yeah.
people a bit lost in terms of should I apply, to IA or M or
Yeah.
compliance? Can I apply to all three? What's the difference? I mean,
Yeah.
I was an ex-auditor. Should I apply for IA? Should I apply for something
Yeah.
else? So I think that's a really very precious and useful thing. Thanks for that. Okay, so the next one, again, tying back to my earlier questions about what we see, my colleagues and I, we see a lot of RMs, right, who are maybe had a good run, 10 years, whatever, how many years in sales, sales targets, and maybe different time in life, they say, hey, look, I can't do this anymore. You know what I mean? And and basically when it comes to RM, some banks have in some banking platforms, I know that, marketing and credit come together. So the RM needs to do, a bit of both, for example. And then so they maybe want to think about pivoting into a bit more, maybe consumer credit or maybe compliance. Some of them, okay, not some, quite a few of them have exposure to, client due diligence, KYC or whatever, what have you, right? How do these people make their candidature stronger in terms of translating to you their intention to move from an RM role to a compliance role? What kind of advice do you think you can give them in order to best market themselves?
Yeah. I think the key point really is about linkage and what value can you bring if you're
Mm,
really contemplating something in compliance, right?
mm,
So where is the linkage in your prior role to
mm,
compliance? So start with that. Of course, you can also approach the compliance department if you're still within the firm and
yeah.
ask, hey, if there are any junior roles available, would you guys be considering an internal transfer, and then you got to play up that, okay, if you're doing KYC, then I've been involved in KYC, I understand some of these. So this would be the very natural way to move into compliance if
Mm,
you're within a bank, right?
yeah.
Yeah, but that's it. It's also not that straightforward, because sometimes, I mean, obviously for the more senior roles, you need someone who has the experience. So
Yeah.
that would be more difficult. And in the more niche areas like investment banking and like some of these wholesale capital markets, you need to have some of that specialist product knowledge as well.
Mm,
Yeah, and because these markets tend to be more global, then you're gonna, whether or not can you bring that value. But as an entry level, or what I call a mid-level transfer, yeah, it's always got to do with what you have in, that is able to link you and value add to the compliance role.
okay. And also on something just came to my mind as well. When I work with RMs who are looking to make that move into compliance, right? One of the things I tell them is that when I look at their resume, and you've probably seen a ton of resume yourselves, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when I see resumes, right, I see them and they put all their achievements, $1 million award kind of thing. So
Yeah.
debunk this myth. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah.
Are those things good for you, or do they just reinforce the fact that they are very good salespeople and shouldn't do compliance? Do you know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
when you see
Yeah.
something like that, what do you think?
Yeah. So, frankly speaking, right, we don't look at sales achievements. Yeah, because it's
Yes.
compliance role, right?
Yeah.
We don't we are not a revenue generation center. We're a cost
Yeah.
center, unfortunately. But that also reinforces the point why you need to be partners with the business, because
Yeah.
otherwise they see you as a big cost center and they don't understand what you do. They think you're overstaffed,
Yeah.
but they forget that with more and more regulations and the bar being raised year after
Yeah.
year, yeah,
Yeah.
you actually do need more and more compliance people.
And also, just so that means to say, right, the challenge, if correct me if I'm wrong, the challenge for, let's say, an RM who wants to pivot into, say, compliance, right, would be
Yeah,
actually to focus less on the sales achievements and focus more on the controls aspects of his or
yes,
her role, correct? Which is a struggle
correct.
because the
Yeah,
majority of the achievements are, or the bullet points are
yeah,
sales, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So I
yeah,
guess it's one of those things that they have
mm,
to try their best to enforce. Okay.
yeah,
So very related to that question, right, is sending signals to someone like you. So for example, I'm an RM and I say, hey, look, I want to go into compliance. And I've done a little bit of, the KYC kind of thing, right? Or whatever it might be. But here's my signal to you. I want to go and I've done some compliance certifications and I want to show it to you,
mm,
right? So I suffered through this and I've passed it. And this is my signal on my resume to show you my intention to do. But I want to ask you more generally for the people here,
yeah.
what kind of compliance certifications are most valuable, and which of them are necessary? Are you able to sort of like give us a list of like really must-have sort of certifications, like like CACs
Right,
or what do you think are the ones that are
right.
really important? Yeah,
Okay, so there are a few. In fact, IBF, I believe you guys run a
we
couple.
do. Yep.
You do the especially the ones for RMs, right? Like the modules 1 to module 10 regulatory
Mm,
exams. So I'm not saying that compliance people need to do that, but myself, when I first went into compliance, my boss sent me for a module 1, to undertake module 1,
mm,
and I found that very useful because it gave me an overview of the Singapore regulations. And then, after that, I decided to do module 5 and module 9 as well, because these relate to Securities and Futures Act,
yep.
Financial Advisors Act, and selling of unit trusts and marketing of collective investment schemes. Uh, Essentially, I could also after that apply for a RM job, because some of the
Your license
companies would,
ready. Yeah.
yeah, I'm licensed,
Yeah.
but unfortunately I didn't practice for 3 years, so it's expired. But yeah, so that's one. But like I said, even after you take that, it doesn't mean you automatically get in. There are others as well. The International Compliance Association Graduate Diploma,
Yeah.
so that gives you a grad dip. But again, more than that, more than giving you that basic foundation in compliance and knowledge,
Mm,
I think what's valuable from these will be the networking experience. So you get to network with people who are the course attendees, and through that, sometimes or somehow, there may be a job opening in those banks that they work for, and then you can try to ask them to refer you. So sometimes a referral actually does cut through
that's
many
great.
layers of HR CVs, right? And for those who are in the financial crime space or want to specialize in that space, there's this ACAMS, or what we call your Association of Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialists.
Yep.
So again, with
ACAMS.
that,
Mm,
yeah, it can make you look more pro on paper, but ultimately we still do assess experience and what you can bring to the table.
yeah.
Some of these courses also tend to be a little bit more expensive, like the ICA ones. I think they come into the $7,000 or $8,000, even with government subsidies or before.
Mm,
Uh, but there are some cheaper ones. Recently, we've been approached by the Wealth Management Institute of Singapore.
yep.
So there's, I think, more in the range of like three, four, $500, $600, and with some MAS, incentive subsidy as well, it can come down a lot more. And we find that the WMI courses tend to be more catered for Singapore market.
Mm,
We actually have live speakers from various banks, people like myself or other senior compliance persons who actually lecture for those courses.
right. Right.
Yeah.
And for
But
these courses
mhm,
which are kind of like new, they're kind of new, for example, like the WMI courses, right?
yeah,
For you as a seasoned compliance professional, if someone were to apply with these sort of new kind of things, is the WMI sort of course something that you would regard quite highly and quite applicable in terms of the local market and people, versus
yes,
the ICA and the
Yeah,
ACAMS,
ICA tend to be more international, right? So
yeah,
they may just touch on Singapore very lightly, but the WMI one, it really gives you insight in the Singapore market.
and that's valuable, yeah,
Yes, yes, and it also has I think if there are certain modules, so if you clear certain modules, then they may invite you to do like a project discussion towards
yep,
the end of the course,
mm,
and those are for people who have done well during the course, and you never know, maybe through that, someone may decide to hire you off. But in spite of all that, right, whilst you're going through the course, be very intentional, not just to learn and absorb,
mm.
but to network. I think the
Okay.
key word here is network. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, I kind of looking at the clock right now, and I just have one question before we start going to the very, very healthy Q&A ones, right? I don't think we can answer
Yeah.
everything. We're going to try. Okay, this one, right, is straight in your face, quite controversial. It's about age, okay? And something that
Yeah.
I encounter, and we have to be realistic about this. You and I were in our 40s already, and I don't know
Yeah.
about you, but sometimes I contemplate, look, if I lose my job, how? I mean, where do I fit now? I'm, too senior to do something junior, too junior to do something brand new, for example, right? So when it comes to you and your business, right, I think the age thing is a very big elephant in the room, to be honest, right? I mean,
Mm.
I've also always believed that the larger the organization, the more hierarchical it must be, which means to say that, if it's like a production line, if you want to be an analyst, an analyst should be 20s, associate should be late 20s, VPs
Mm.
mid 30s, MDs make in late 30s or 40s, for example, right? Within compliance, right? I mean, if say there was an AVP role or whatever it might be, do you think that there are any differences between hiring someone in their 20s versus someone in their 40s? I mean, is that feasible? Is that within your realm of possibility? Which
Mm.
is that permissible? Is that allowed? Is that encouraged? Is it very difficult? Any caveats or any case studies that you know of? You know.
Yeah. Well, I kind of have a live one in my team right now.
Okay, cool.
But so yeah, she's approaching early 60s. But she's still part of my team. Well, bit part because she was my department's secretary for my regional
Wow.
boss.
Mm,
Was purely doing meetings, administration, that kind of thing, taking minutes, and then she expressed some interest to
right.
do compliance. So I said, yeah, why not? We can start you off with something within the department since you're already somewhat part of the team,
Yeah.
and we'll kind of give you some training. You can start off with the simple stuff. So she's been doing that for the last 3 years.
Fantastic.
I think she's
That's
doing great.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, it's an extra pair of hands. Really, it's quid pro quo, right?
Yeah.
But if we talk about the larger, wider, market, Singapore and all that, I think it really depends on the hiring manager, right? Personally, for me, I feel that what makes a compliance person a good one is not really the age. It's really more the experience, the value. With older people, not say older people, but people who are more experienced, you get that sense of maturity that comes in with who you bring in. And if you have a team of people who are millennials, again, no disrespect to millennials,
Mm,
you get very different perspectives. And what you want is an ecosystem of different age groups,
mm.
different cultures, so that you can share the best practice in terms of what everyone can bring to the table. If everyone's the same, then you're going to get a very similar one-dimensional perspective, and that doesn't help. For compliance, you want to consider all the various possibilities, and sometimes someone who is more experienced may actually let you see something that someone younger may not.
Fair enough. And I
Yeah.
think, I
Yeah.
think on that, I was just thinking, just another idea came. I'm gonna ask you to do a repeat session one day and work
Yeah.
with us on very specific like resume. Like for example, I think like if a 50-year-old applies to you, I mean, and you know for a fact that these people, if they are on the job, they can perform. But I think one of the first hurdles would be how to even get that resume noticed, right? So maybe
Yeah.
one day down the road, we can work together on certain
Yeah.
things, about how to position certain keywords and how you frame so that you can maximum hit rate lah in that sense. So
Yeah.
I'll work with you on something like that. Okay, so I'm gonna go straight into Q&A and you can probably see it
Sure.
through. We'll just be fair and just go in order lah. So the first
Yeah.
one would be from anonymous attendee. Just
Yep.
basically, Dave, can you just share your a day in the life of a compliance professional? Thank you very much. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay. I think it depends, right? Whether what level of what level of seniority you are. So
Yeah.
If the junior one's very simple, you come in, then you do the more BAU stuff.
Yeah.
So like trade surveillance, clicking off the alerts that come off the system,
Yep.
putting a rationale why this is not a concern and does not need to be escalated,
Mm.
all the way to middle level where they will supervise these juniors.
Mm.
For myself, it's a little bit more dynamic because whilst I have to manage the program, I
Mm.
also have to think about, um, what if there's some ad hoc email from the business that suddenly comes, and usually they will come because business is dynamic, right? No situation is the same. It
Yeah.
can be similar, but so then that's how we react. Unfortunately, we have to react for some of these.
Mm.
For those where we think we can be more strategic and more forward-looking,
Yep.
for instance, like we may be called to attend a new product or a
Yep.
new business initiative meeting. That's where we can think 10 steps down the road, like, okay, you want to do this, this is probably what you need,
Mm.
that's where you need to get to. Then we'll start to plan, how long you need before you can roll out in the market, for instance. So it's very varied. I would say it's dynamic to some
It's not,
extent,
no
but
one
then
day
it
is the
can also
same,
be
right?
correct. For the more junior one, it can be a little bit more operational, and then that's where it's more kind of expectable. Yeah.
Okay, Ken. Okay, so I think the next question is a fairly long one. I think part of it, Morgan, you sort of like, Dave, I think you can see it as well. I think
Yeah.
part of it you answered, but anyway, Morgan asked, always wanted to embark into compliance upon graduating in 2020 during circuit breaker. Obviously, the market is very tough. Fast forward 2 years to today, landed an offer for a compliance role, illegal and insider trading surveillance, right? Would like to humbly get your advice on how to get myself prepared beside having financial markets knowledge. Would like to humbly ask as well, are there any courses, we talk about the courses, you would recommend
Mm.
give himself or herself an edge above the rest? Aim not to be an individual who knows a lot, but aim to be an individual who wants to be resourceful at the end of my career.
Sure.
Yeah, you want to try to take a stab at this quite quickly?
Yeah. So
Mm.
I think this role is probably more like an e-communication surveillance role or a trade surveillance role.
Mm.
Probably one of the two. So he's probably going to be looking at employees chatter on email, chat groups, Bloomberg chat, Reuters chat, stuff like that.
Mm.
So how to be more better equipped in this space, right?
Mm.
I would say if you're already in compliance, one way is to do continuous learning. Obviously WMI and all that, as I mentioned just now,
Yeah.
those may be some useful ones, but don't forget seminars and webinars. So there are very good ones that come every year, like from Thomson Reuters.
Yeah.
They call it the ASELAS or the regulatory Asia ASEAN regulatory um, you know compliance seminars.
Mm.
Go sign up for these. They're all free. They used to be in person. Nowadays they are online as well. So
Mm-hmm.
learn from the best. So you have speakers on these seminars. And then you've got compliance people attending these seminars.
Right.
There are lunch breaks where it's not for you to go and
Networking.
eat the buffet. Yeah, it's networking. Bring your
Fantastic. Yeah.
business cards. Share which bank you come from. What are some of the common difficulties? So all these will help, and also try to find like-minded compliance folks in the industry. So that's something that I do even up to today.
Yeah.
We Over the years you make a lot of industry contacts and peers, right? And some of us we actually grouped up ourselves into WhatsApp chat groups,
Yeah.
and we do share. Obviously, we don't share client information and
Yeah.
internal stuff,
All go
but
jail
we share.
together.
Yeah, because we feel that we need to protect one another. Yeah, I
Yeah.
help you, you help me.
Yeah.
Not everyone's on the same up or down at the same time. So
Yeah.
where we can help, we help, and then yeah. So that's how we try to pay it forward in that sense.
I think it's great because again,
Yeah,
you touched on the networking thing. I think super important, super essential
yeah,
for survival, especially in this kind of environment, very competitive, right?
yeah.
Okay, so the next one, very quickly, as I said, we're gonna try to go as many as we can, but I don't know how many we can do. Ezekiel, thanks for the question. So Ezekiel asks, I'm currently starting a reg compliance role with one of the new digital banks. He comes from a KYC CDD background with a small local fintech. Any advice you would give? Starting at this new role? Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So I guess it depends whether you are the only compliance CDD person there or you have a small team, right? So
Mm.
if you have a team, leverage on the team, right?
Mm.
If you're the head, then obviously do some delegation and portfolio assignment based on character fit and skill set,
Yeah.
because everybody works together, makes the team sum of the parts. You know that saying, right?
Yeah.
But if you're the only one, then like me, there was one role where I was the one-man show. Then you have to do everything. So you have to prioritize. You
Yeah.
have to, see which comes first, which is more important.
Yeah.
When you're
Yeah.
one-man show, unfortunately, sometimes there'll be long hours, but it's also the best time for you to actually learn because
There's just so
you will
much
know
to
A to
learn.
Z.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know A to Z. For me, when I did that one-man show, I actually, built up the compliance program from scratch. So there was nothing when I first came, and then slowly, bit by bit, bringing my expertise and know-how over the various banks that I've been with, put together a policy, work together with the head office, got everything up to shape. So it's really being resourceful, being intentional, and prioritization.
I love
Don't
that.
overwork.
This.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't overwork. I mean, life is still more than just work, but yeah,
Yeah, definitely,
balance.
man. Yeah, amen to
Yeah,
that. Okay, so Wing Yan ask if I've been in the audit and compliance roles for various industries for 20 years, is there any possibility to join the banking industry? I think you sort of like answered the question. You want to reinforce
yeah,
the answer?
yeah. I think again, it's about the relevancy and what you can bring,
Linkages.
the values, yeah, the linkages, right? So,
Mm,
interestingly, I had this question a couple of days when I was having lunch with, an old colleague,
mm,
and the person said, you know, um, I have a friend who's in pharmaceutical compliance. How to get into banking? So I'm like, it's not really direct correlation because I can't think of any other than policy skill sets, right?
mm.
So then the question is, at that stage, what's your opportunity cost? Do you want to stay on in pharmaceutical? Do you want to go to the regulator HSA,
Mm.
consider that, or do you want to, cross over, but you have to pay some opportunity cost for that because the banks can't take you in at the same level, obviously, because you don't
Yes,
have the banking knowledge, right?
correct.
But you can consider somewhere, where, it could be maybe, for instance, let's just think out of the box a bit.
Mm.
Must it always be a bank? Could it be a vendor that provides services to a bank?
Yep.
There are many vendors and reg tech companies these days that
Yeah.
actually, they provide KYC services. They do document management, and blockchains and all that. So could these be some of those? Some companies also provide trade surveillance automation services. Could this be your way in rather than through the normal route? So you have to think a little bit. And then, of course, work with recruiters. Sometimes the recruiters may be able to position you in such a way that you get a role that's more generic,
Yeah.
or you aim for a role within banking that doesn't require so much specialist knowledge. So there are some, like in the central pillar you saw earlier,
Mm.
where it may be relating to vendor procurement or, uh, you know, technology outsourcing,
Mm.
somewhere along those lines where it's more about service level agreement management, project management, as opposed to pure compliance regulatory advisory, which will require specialist knowledge. So
Okay.
find a way that you can get in, through one of these that probably you can link easily.
Okay, that's a good answer. At this juncture, before I ask the last couple of questions, Elisa, if you don't mind, can you pull up the survey? For those people who joined us already for many of our sessions, you are probably no stranger to the survey that's going to be on your screen. It really helps us. I mean, judging from the quality of this session, which I really enjoy, and it's very, very practical, I expect to see nothing but 4s and 5s now. Okay, no pressure. This survey is going to only take you literally 20 seconds, maybe less, but maybe 20 seconds. And while you guys are doing it, I'm just gonna carry on talking to David. So thanking you guys for responding to the survey as quickly as you can, as many as you can. Okay, so while I leave that,
Adrian, just
yeah,
1 minute.
yeah,
We have a request from one of our participants
mm-hmm.
for David to share his slides later on after the questions been answered. Is it okay?
Yeah, sure. Why don't
Yeah,
I flash it now while
Yeah, because
I ask the
those
question.
who do the survey for us will be rewarded with this slide sharing, right?
Oh, that's a very interesting. Okay, hang on a second. Let me just okay. So I'm gonna be leaving the survey on, and then I'm going to find this thing again. I'm gonna share the slide. I'm gonna ask David a couple more questions before I let him go. Okay.
sure.
Give me a second, and here we go, and screen share. I hope you guys can see. Okay, so real quickly. Oh, this is interesting. I heard that the compliance is being outsourced to other countries now. How is the market prospect? Now, the caveat is that, IBF, we also do a lot of outplacement services, which means to say that people want to jettison or want to, shut down a function. We will go in there and give them some sort of soft landing. And I have to admit, though, that I've seen some banks, shaving off like level 1 people, whatever it might be. But what's your thoughts on outsourcing, and how's market prospects in compliance?
Yeah, I guess compliance is not immune to the outsourcing wave,
Right.
right? Or the
Yeah.
trend.
Yeah.
And everyone, I mean, in cost environment, everybody wants to keep costs low.
Right.
But the way I see it, the pillars on the left, interestingly, on the screen,
Yeah.
those in the advisory function is going to be much harder to outsource, because we're talking about dynamic kind of scenarios that come
Yep.
every day.
Yep.
And you need someone who is local SME expert who can do
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Now we
Okay.
come to the central role.
Mm.
That's where you can and potentially, may have more chances of outsourcing happening. So I'm sure some of the bigger banks, they do have the center of excellence, some in Malaysia, some in India, and some in Philippines, for instance. And these tend to do more with like the technology related space. So
Right.
trade surveillance, what else can I see there? Let me see. Okay, even KYC, right? Sometimes it can be, moving to one of these centers of excellence. Yeah, but the rest of them, okay, employee conflicts to some extent, they can be as well.
Mm.
But it really depends also on the strategy of each bank. So some, they feel that, you do need to have these in the regional office rather than on an offshore center, because like it or not, when you offshore, it can be, too distant for you, and sometimes you don't get the level of support or the level of, response rate. Whereas if it's in country, then some of these, they you get your response faster. You obviously, if there are any follow up, it's a lot easier. It's a lot more seamless. Because I mean, I take my example. I used to work in HSBC, and there was some stuff where, because it's been outshored, they tell you, oh, please fill in this service request form, and we'll assign you a case number. And then 2 days later, we'll get back to you as per the SLA. And I'm like, what the hell? It's like, I need the answer now.
Yeah.
2 days later, it's too late. So there, yeah. So when we consider what can be outsourced, it's really stuff that are not time sensitive,
Mm.
and dealing with not live non-live data, but where it's live data or you need a response pretty fast, then it's always harder to offshore.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. Okay. So just maybe one more question. Okay. So Clarence, Clarence, very loyal supporter of our sessions. Hi, David. I'm looking at the application of data analytics to compliance. What function relies heavily on data? Is that a question you think you can process and
You see,
answer?
application of data analytics to compliance. Okay. And then what function relies heavily
Or
on
maybe you
data?
can answer, how does data analytics now factor
Yeah.
into, the 21st century version of compliance?
Yeah.
Perhaps. Yeah.
Well, there is some adoption of that, I would say. And pretty much they fall into the space of compliance reporting, issues management.
Mm.
And if you look at a circular pillar on the next slide, right? That one talks about the last few pillars,
Mm.
reporting, analytics, and
Yep.
incidents. So these two are intertwined in a sense.
Mm.
So that's uh I'll say, again, depends on whether it's a big shop or small shop. Small shop may not usually have the budget for these, and they tend to be more manual. Although there are some that automate, and then larger banks, they will have budget for these, so
Mm.
they have fanciful dashboards. A lot of it is to serve management reporting, because
Mm.
from that angle, then they can see what we call the red, amber, green, right? Which are the red areas, which are the medium areas
Right.
that need attention, and then they will develop customized programs
Okay.
to fix. So analytics help in that sense. In the financial crime space, it also helps what we call a trend analysis. So for instance, if you see certain amounts of money being wired to certain accounts in certain locations,
Yeah.
it may establish a fact pattern, right? And then
Mm.
you realize, oh, okay, some dodgy stuff is happening with these accounts, then you investigate more. So that's where and how analytics come and help us in that sense to make that call. But the final call ultimately, right, whether you want to escalate that to the regulator and say, hey, we filed a suspicious report,
Yeah.
or it all boils down to a judgment call. So
Okay.
yeah, data will give you that that gut feel, and then based on your experience and what you know, then you still have to make that call.
Got it. I want to take, okay, sorry, man. I'm going to take one final question
Sure.
from
Yeah.
Chloe. Chloe, this is a good question. Are there more career prospects for compliance specialists or compliance generalists? This question
Right.
is, but
I
yeah.
would say both, because the industry is very big. It's a global one, right? So at some point you may want to specialize, at some point you may want to be generalist. But for myself, I've always, like to be a generalist because I like to see A to Z.
Mm,
So, and working for a smaller shop or a medium-sized shop will give you that opportunity to be a generalist because you have to know everything.
yeah.
Now, of course, if you're more, the kind of wired in a way where you like to do only the expectable or within a ring fence defined scope, then a specialist may be more suitable for
Got
you.
it.
So it really different strokes for different folks.
Yeah. And Chloe, I hope that helps. Okay, so before I let you go, I know you're a very busy man, but before I let you go, any final words of encouragement for people who are, kind of like contemplating, making this monumental move? It's not, something to be taken lightly, and some, it can be seem like a mountain, right, for some people who don't really come from that kind of background. What kind of final words might you have, for the folks who are joining us today?
Right. I think couple, right? But the main one is this: never give up trying to get in, right? If you don't succeed at first, try and try again. Networking is very important. So you never know, right? All aspects, from seminars to course mates to uh, recruiters to vendors, and these are all the potential feeder paths into a career with compliance. And also be open to stints, right? If really, people may sometimes shudder at the thought of having to do contract roles, but sometimes a contract role could be your lifeline to get a foot into the door.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that, right, it could be 6 months, 12 months, or even a maternity cover type contract. But with that, if you do well enough, usually they can convert you to permanent or deploy you to somewhere. And
Yeah.
for
And
those
then,
who are mid-career, without experience, it's also, the question is the opportunity cost, right? Are you willing to start from, maybe at the 25th percentile level instead of 50th percentile, where you may be currently at the 75th percentile? So are you able to, so-called bite the bullet and start from slightly lower?
understand, and that's a super good point, because I don't know whether it's published already. Look out for our events on the 30th. I'm going to be doing a session that ties in superbly well with what David just said. Are you able to do that? Huh? So look out for the 30th of June. I think there'll be a session that I'll be doing. But I totally agree. Thanks so much, David, for spending this time. I'm going to let you go. And I can guarantee you one thing. Okay, after this session, you will, when you check your LinkedIn, you will get a bunch of requests. So everybody who wants David to respond, please prepare to write a policy paper. Yeah, but I hope this thing has been very, very informative to everybody. I had a lot of fun. It's so nice to see you again. And then as I promised, the next couple of weeks I'll come by, meet you for lunch and catch up more about old times lah. But otherwise, thanks so much for being here, and thank you to everyone who joined us here today. I hope this has been useful, and we will see you again for the next session.